I had 4 near-death experiences where my heart stopped. The health concern was my brain shutting off my heart. My heart is in great condition, but my brain, because of my exposure to the hyper-vigilant warfare life over decades, right? We fought the GWAT over decades. My brain felt when I slowed down at the War College that it would just shut me off if I was at risk. And so that happened 4 times. They last for 35 to 40 seconds. My heart wakes me back up. But the 3rd time happened in front of my 8-year-old daughter at the time, who's now 15. And I just reached out to the world of my network and said, someone give me a solution. I was lucky enough to meet a great doctor at Mayo Clinic. And he said, hey, Bri, we probably can't ever figure out what your brain's doing because the brain's the final frontier, but we can stop it from happening by implanting a pacemaker. And so when you sit there, that's a pivotal moment. When you sit there and everything you've worked for since I walked out of high school is now going to go away in one form or another. And of course it doesn't, right? You introduced me as Colonel Retired Brian Cook. But wait, you're not in control of how long you get to be good at something.
Hey, let's welcome my guest, Brian Cook, a retired U.S. Army colonel, leader, a pivotal figure in NATO's mission in Afghanistan, and recently a civilian sector leader and author. Welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you.
Good to see you, Danny. Thank you very much for welcoming me up on and getting me up on the platform. And thank you for the intro. That's kind of interesting one. Love it.
Awesome. Let's start with your story and how you joined the Army and what happened after you joined. Hey guys, I want to tell you about something you need to check out. It's called Memora. My friend is the founder. This project lets families preserve the voices of their loved ones, whether they've passed away, are living with a terminal illness, or may one day lose their speech. Listen to this sample.
Hi, sweetheart. If you're hearing this, I want you to know how much I love you. You were the best.
Don't wait until it's too late. Protect the voices that matter most. Click the link in the description to learn more and get started today.
Okay, really interesting. I'll have to be fast. It's 33 years baked in is into 2 minutes is pretty fast. Californian. I was born in Pennsylvania, but grew up in California. Had to escape California after getting out of high school. I wanted to do something terrific. Went to the academy at West Point, and of course was changed in a good way to go to the academy. Graduated to the academy right as the wall came down. And we thought Pax Americana, it was going to all be okay. But we had a war right away. 1990, 1991, Operation Desert Sword Shield. And I was lucky enough to get through my basic tank training to get into the war. That sounds really weird. But I was the youngest tank platoon leader in the 1st Infantry Division. And that was just foundational for me as a leader to jump into the warrior tribe. And many people, I'm sure your guests have talked about this before, once you're in the tribe, you get the understanding of how the profession works very quickly, especially at war. So let's fast forward off of that. So there's a lot of history in there I can go back to, but got a Bronze Star coming out of Desert Storm, a 2nd lieutenant, the youngest rank of an officer, one of the highest awards in our nation. A very, very, very unique position. And I grew up in the armor, which means I moved fast, I blew stuff up, but your mind has to go with that. And I know you've had great armor leaders on the program that I can't even touch, but like Paul Funk, who we grow people who understand things quickly. We understand how to teach them and do them very well. And that's really the recipe. So I grew up doing that battalion all the way up and through battalion command. Around the backside of my battalion command, I turned into a planner and an executor. How to synchronize action over time and space became my go-to. So I did that in Iraq and in Afghanistan under General Mark Milley. In Afghanistan, I was his FUOPS chief, Future Operations chief, 85-man NATO team out there, which was amazing. I got the pick of the litter. I had the XO from the Ministry of Defense as one of my planners from Germany. I got so lucky. It was amazing. Amazing tour. Came back off of that, ran big money in the Army, training portfolio worth double-digit billions inside the Pentagon, which exposed me to something I never knew. There is a business plan behind this thing called strategy and operations. So that was a whole new category. And then I rolled up to the Army War College to help them with their budget, but ultimately to teach what I had learned in my Army career to upcoming leaders, especially how to plan at scale. So as you know, we run the only military in the world that controls, and that's to control, manages risk worldwide. So there are generals in charge of nearly every inch of the earth, and they report to the President of the United States. They have to have a plan, of course. And I became a guy who knew how to write those plans and teach people how to write those plans. So when we created Army Futures Command, I got asked to come down to help out and write that plan. On the third day being in Austin, Texas, I was asked if I would take over and actually be the chief of plans. And that was the kind of the coup de grace, what I ended my career on. Unfortunately, right there at the end of my career, I had 4 near-death experiences where my heart stopped. So it's really weird. The Army was trying to kick me out medically, and I had a 4-star general named Mike Murray who was like, Brian, keep going. This is terrific. I love this. Great plan. Keep going. It was really tough. So January 2020, retired from the Army, spent 3.5 years in IBM as the Army Futures Command and TRADOC lead. And now those two are together, which is kind of neat. And then spent time in some small business until I landed here where I am today. 1, as the author of Set Your Table. 2, and we talked about in warm up, as the head of revenue for a small company called Red Thread X.
Awesome. That's a great story. So was that health concern related to stress, or was it some kind of a health issue? And do you still experience those?
Yeah, so the health concern was my brain shutting off my heart. My heart is in great condition, but my brain, because of my exposure to the hyper-vigilant warfare of life over decades, right? We fought the GWAT over decades. My brain felt when I slowed down at the War College that it would just shut me off if I was at risk. And so that happened 4 times. They last for 35 to 40 seconds. My heart wakes me back up. But the third time happened in front of my 8-year-old daughter at the time, who's now 15. And I just reached out to the world of my network and said, someone give me a solution. I was lucky enough to meet a great doctor at Mayo Clinic. And he said, hey, Brian, we probably can't ever figure out what your brain's doing because the brain's the final frontier, but we can stop it from happening by implanting a pacemaker. And what I didn't know, and by the way, no one told me, that would end my Army career. And so when you sit there, that's a pivotal moment. When you sit there and everything you've worked for since I walked out of high school is now going to go away in one form or another. And of course it doesn't, right? You introduced me as Colonel Retired Brian Cook. But wait, you're not in control of how long you get to be good at something. And so when that happened, I started wrestling with what now I call the Set Your Table framework about how do you figure that out when you're in that tense. And so the health issue isn't any longer. I do have a mechanical device. So I have great friends at TSA that help me out every time I go through the airport, but no big health concerns. I hope it doesn't show at all.
Yeah, very very interesting point that you mentioned about the things outside of your control, and like your life trajectory can drastically change without you ever expecting that. So how was it to transition out of the military in that way for you? Was it challenging to adapt, like find your new job and like mentally?
Well, it wasn't. And here's the blessing of going through this challenge. As I was teaching at the War College, I fell in love with Stoicism, some work from Ryan Holiday, and through Tim Ferriss, by the way. So I've got a couple of really cool mentors who said, look, goes the enemy. The obstacle is the way, right? If you understand anything, the external stimuli is just that, a stimuli. You have the ability to react however you choose to it. So we call that the freedom gap, right? What happens with the external stimuli and how you react between the time in between that is your freedom to decide who you're going to be and apply your virtues to the situation or the program or the operation. And so that was probably the biggest thing I learned. And I learned that before my transition. So as I moved in, out of Army Futures Command and began my transition to retire, it was phenomenal to have that as a tool base and say, okay, I don't have to hyperreact. And probably the biggest thing is we worry about 80% of the things we worry about never happen. Maybe 10, 20% happen. So think about why you worry about something. So for me, that was, I was walking into the pandemic. It was December of 2019 when I was retiring from the Army. and half my family got COVID before we knew what it was. And I'm retiring from the Army. I'm having ceremony to become Mr. Brian Cook. And how do you hit that transition? And all of that back into it and say, okay, let's be worried about the things that are most important to be worried about, right? Taking care of a family, being a great father and a great husband. Those are big acts, right? And then if you can be great at something else, you're blessed, right? And I had friends that literally walked up to me and said, at my retirement, you may be the perfect guy for this new job IBM's creating at Army Futures Command. And so those like things lined up. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and by the way, Ryan Holiday's book, Obstacle is the Way, is actually my favorite book as well.
I love it. It's literally
Yeah,
like right here next to me.
awesome, awesome. So talking about books, tell me about your new book and the framework that you described there. What is it all about? And who can benefit most from reading it?
Oh wow. So you got all the great questions, right? So let's talk about a little inspiration. I was at the Loya Jirga, which is an Afghan meeting of all elders and government professionals, and the Secretary of NATO was coming in when I was at FUOPS, and we had done everything humanly possible, not everything, but what we believe was everything humanly possible for Afghanistan to take over its security by that point. This was 2013. And we're going to, by act, like in an official way, the Sec General was going to hand the security of Afghanistan back to their leadership. And I was sitting there, and there was an Afghan soldier that did not know there was a helicopter supposed to come in holding the Secretary General. And he pointed an RPG at the helicopter as the Secretary General of NATO is landing for the event. I mean, decades of work almost went down the tube in a moment. But even when that happened, even when we gave the security back to the Afghans, we discovered they were not ready. And it's cultural, it's the Gordian knot of nations. If you've not, there's great books on this, but it's hard to see what people can accomplish at scale. And when I saw that, I said, what is going on here? And I tried to decompose it, like all great authors and thinkers do, is if there's a problem, how did you get to that problem? And it took me years, but that's where this framework came from. And it ties to values. Very basically, what I'm asking you to do in this book in a very basic format is find out what your foundations are. What are your foundational values? What are your foundational roles? And what is your passionate life that what are those skills that the universe, I'm a Christian man. I believe you are too, Danny. I've heard you in podcasts talk about it, right? Some people say God. I will say universe to be applicable to everybody who's listening here. But the universe gave you something. What are you going to bring to the world? And so when you do that, start with values, find your passion, and then face the world. You are setting your table. And what I say in my book is if you don't set your table, somebody else will, always. Sometimes it's your family. It could be your faith. It could be a corporation. In some cases, it could be law enforcement, right? In an odd way, right? But you give that up. And now in these days, I think more valuable than ever is the ability to set our own tables to do what we need to do for ourselves, our families, our relationships, our communities, and right, in some cases, our nation. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does. And can you dive a little deeper into who would be your ideal
Oh, yeah.
reader?
I would start by anybody who feels stuck. I think if you can get to a quiet place, I meditate. I know a lot of people are not into that type of an act, but find a quiet place and find 10 minutes of solitude. Maybe some quiet noise behind it, not music, just quiet noise behind you. And just think for a second about, are you in the place where you want to be? And everybody, I would tell you, me included, you are here today and you want to be somewhere else, and there's a gap there, and that's fine. But if you are truly stuck, you don't know the way out, you're my number one reader. And then I was just at AUSA, and I don't know how many times I heard it. Phenomenally successful colonels and generals and humans that I have a personal relationship, sometimes, centered around violence. They were awesome in the Army, and now they are wrestling with showing up well in corporate America. And I don't think that should be hard. Matter of fact, guys who I worked with at IBM will tell you I was running on, full RPMs, making scores. I had a $6.5 million OTA in my first 120 days in the company. People were like, who's this dude? So you can be successful and yet still be empty. If you're that person, I think this book is exactly for you. And then the third person is a person that is a leader that understands if he or she doesn't have the skills to unstick people, sometimes in their own culture of a company or an organization, that you will not succeed in this world. There is too much noise. There's too much counterculture. There's too much other things people can, like we talk about junk information, just like junk food and junk light. Right now, there's too much junk information. If I can, as a leader, get you to take the signal from the noise, we win as a team. Not I win as a team. We win as a team. And then I teach you how to do that. I think personally, I think that would be hugely beneficial to any organization to have just like Tradoc, who, basically formalize this, right? If you arm the leader with the ability to train people to a higher level, all it is replication at scale. And everybody in the army becomes better. That's what I think the kind of the third audience I'd love to hit.
Great, and I'll leave the link to the book in the description for the video. So if you're watching, listening, feel free to click on that link and check it out once you finish watching the video. But before we start wrapping things up, how important, in your opinion, mentorship is, and like finding mentor or maybe being a mentor for someone else for personal development, overcoming obstacles, and closing that gap that you mentioned?
I think mentorship is one of the most important skills that the Lord gave us, or the universe gave us. You can even go to the Bible. I mean, look at it. How many mentors can you find in the Bible? And I won't go there, but there are a lot, right? And I have been benefited. Of course, the Army is set up this way. It's like great leaders put a hand in the back of a young lieutenant and said, hey, LT, take a walk. General Don Campbell, former USAR commander, when he was a major, I was a second lieutenant, he said, literally, we were at a party, he said, when you become a major, and I was a second lieutenant, you know what the jump is? I mean, that's a huge jump. And I'm like, I'm going to be a major. Let's just say that's not in the cards yet. He said, no, you'll be a major. And like, oh my gosh. But to have mentors like that, General McMaster is one of my mentors. And the valuable conversations of a human to human interaction, not talking to Grok or ChatGPT in the morning, that know you so deeply that they'll tell you the truth when you're off and on, is indescribable what that can do. And then if you can set the example about mentorship, we go back to the Tradoc, right? Literally have a manual about this, leadership manual from Tradoc that says mentorship is key. So if you can do that in a battalion, a platoon, a company, even like a corps, General Milley in the Corps of Third Corps, we literally had guidance on mentorship. It strengthens an entire organization. And then the last part about a mentorship that I would tell you, it lasts past each chapter. It's like a thread. When you write a book, you have an arc and a thread. And when you try to build your arc, the thread is what pulls your arc through the book. Mentorship is that thread between chapters. When I left out of the Army, I looked to my mentors and they said, Bry, think about this, think about that, link up with this guy, link up with that guy. You're far more powerful than you believe you are. Again, back to the worrying, right? If you have great mentors, you have nothing to worry about. And so that's what I think that's where I'd kind of end the mentorship conversation.
Yeah, great advice. And one other topic I want to quickly cover while we're here as a U.S. Army officer, and you had to be in Afghanistan and in different places across the world. How hard was it to balance that out with your family and being a parent and raising your kids? And maybe you can give some advice to people who are going through a similar experience.
Wow. I mean, that's a very insightful question, Danny. Thank you for it. Just human to human. I lost 2 marriages to the United States Army because we go faster than we know we actually could go and further. And you often believe that the strongest thing you have in your life can endure the most. And I think we often don't understand where the tipping point is of other humans when we are being tremendously strong. And I have phenomenal kids. I actually have a granddaughter and a son-in-law, a former Army sergeant. And we Like, it's been a lot of work to keep that together. And I don't call that balance. I'm not a life work balance person. I think you set your priorities. I think you have a conversation with the people that you love in your life before you go downrange and say, have the conversation about what right feels like, but also end up having that conversation. As a planner, we always say your first best guess, no matter how much time you spend with it, is going to be wrong. So build a plan that's adaptable, right? Talk about Ukraine does this at scale, right? Do that with your family. Sit down with the people you love and say, I'm doing something harder than anything else I've ever done. Or again, right? In my case, 5 times. And I love you. And there will be days where I can't talk to you, but always know my love is there and I'd love to reconnect with you. And if there's not enough interaction, if there's not enough, feeding you what I'm doing to make you feel like, I'm still safe, then tell me. Because oftentimes our families, while they know that they know that we're doing important work, they don't know where to say, hey, can I get an extra phone call this week or an extra Zoom? And if I could go back, brother, I mean, I would, I would not let any relationship that I treasured, be ended by the violence of nations. I just think it still hurts me this day, even though my kids both live within an hour of me. So I can go and play with my granddaughter this afternoon if I'd like to.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Final question to you, not even question. If you can share some final advice or maybe something that we didn't have a chance to cover and you want to share that with the audience, feel free to use this time to talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading my retirement speech, the 5 points of my retirement speech right before I got started this morning after the cold plunge. Look, don't wait to have a perfect opportunity. Do not wait to have that peace, of calm and know that you can be successful. None of us, when we started these things, a podcast, a book, a tour in Afghanistan, none of us had the whole answer in our hand before we started. You have to go with risk and feel that chaos and be in a very unpredictable state to have success. It is just the rule. Thanks to the Stoic gods, right? And go with friends and mentors and go get stuff done. If you wait until the situation is perfectly there and the timing is perfectly right and the team is perfectly right, it's never going to happen. And you're going to die with unrealized dreams and a heart that's empty. It's out here, new relationships, new successes. The world is out here, but you have to feel uncomfortable and sometimes even be hurt. In my case, physically hurt to lead and get to great things in life. So don't wait. I know you're stuck. Let's just go. So that'd be my message.
Awesome. And I want to remind, all of the viewers, listeners, that the link to Brian's book is in the description. Once the video ends, go to the website and check it out. But Brian, thank you for joining me this morning and for sharing all of these stories and advice. And yeah, I hope that you continue to thrive in the civilian sector and continue sharing your experiences with the public.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much for your platform and congratulations, man. You are leading by example, and we are very thankful for you being in our networks.
Thank you.